Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at the infamous Cruelclaw. So the infamous Cruelclaw is a 3-mana Rakdos commander. It's a 3/3 Weasel mercenary with Menace, and it says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. So there's two things going on with this. Let's get to the first one right off the bat. It allows you to cast things basically for free. You cheat on the mana by just discarding a card, which is essentially what Dream Halls does. Now the problem is it's just exiling off the top until you hit a non-land, so how do you make it so that you're hitting the exact card that you want? Well, thankfully we're in black, and this of course means that we get to play cards like Imperial Seal and Vampiric Tutor to put cards on the top of our deck. So we can go cast Infamous Cruelclaw, attack, deal combat damage to our opponent, and we have our top deck tutors to put things on top of our deck to cast those spells for free. And then hopefully those spells will either be combo pieces that we can use to win the game immediately or just big, fat, expensive win cons. So let's talk about our top deckers. We obviously have Imperial Seal and Vampiric Tutor. We also get access to Insatiable Avarice, which admittedly is 3 mana and therefore not as good. Similarly, Cruel Tutor. We also have Scheming Symmetry, which is a real problem because it gives cards to all of our opponents, so we better damn well win the game off of whatever card that we're grabbing. And then there's also Flamekin Harbinger, which top decks Elementals, and Goblin Recruiter, which top decks Goblins, and we'll get to the combos for how these work. So what are our big payoffs? Well, one is Void Winnower. Obviously, there's ways around it. It doesn't blank every spell, but this is a pretty good card to cheat in. There's also cards like Baleful Force. At the beginning of each upkeep, you draw a card and lose a life. We can cheat in Peer into the Abyss, Bolus's Citadel, Kozilek the Great Distortion, which under normal circumstances wouldn't be so great to cheat in, but in this case, we do cast the spell. So Kozilek or any other of the big Eldrazi Titans that have cast triggers we could run. And Hoarding Broodlord, which is part of its various own combos. We also down here have Breach the Multiverse, 7 mana, each player mills 10. For each player, choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard. Put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Then each creature you control becomes a Phyrexian addition to its other type. So basically, everyone mills 10, and then you pick the best card of 4 out of everybody's graveyards. So this card is the most, outside of combos, highest upside in terms of we can get the most value out of it, but it's also the highest risk because we might not hit anything worthwhile. So now let's talk combos. So for specifically Goblin Recruiter, we have the Snoop combo. So Goblin Recruiter can stack our deck to have a Snoop combo. So we've got Conspicuous Snoop. So we either need to wait a turn to draw the Snoop or we need to be able to draw a card immediately. Now, once we have Snoop, Goblin Recruiter stacks multiple goblins on top of our deck. So we're then going to stack the cards as Snoop, get Snoop into play. Then the top card of our deck is Kiki Jiki. So we make infinite Snoops. And then on the last one, instead of copying Snoop, we copy Recruiter and we put Mog Fanatic on top of our deck. Now we have infinite Snoops in play, Mog Fanatics on top of our deck. We can infinitely ping our opponents. Aside from that, we also have Dualcaster Mage Molten Duplication. We also have Underworld Breach plus LED, which in this case, we don't have access to blue, so we can't Brain Freeze, but we can win in other ways. And we've got Saw in Half, which is going to work with Hoarding Broodlord. So specifically, Hoarding Broodlord lets us tutor a card into face down exile, and then we can cast that. So what we're going to do is Hoarding Broodlord, and Hoarding Broodlord is going to go grab Saw in Half. We're then going to Saw the Broodlord, and it's going to grab 2 spells. Now, if we've got enough mana, we can just go grab something like Dualcaster Molten Duplication. But if we don't have enough mana, instead we're going to grab Sacrifice. And remember, we can convoke these spells. So we use the Hoarding Broodlord, we use one of them to sacrifice a Hoarding Broodlord, generating 8 mana, and then typically the other spell will be Peer into the Abyss, for which we can then draw a bajillion cards. It doesn't specifically have to be Peer into the Abyss, it could be something else, but this is the biggest payoff. Now, aside from all that, we are going to want ways of getting haste with the infamous Cruelclaw, because we're going to want to attack with it immediately rather than just cast Cruelclaw and pass the turn. So we have a bunch of ways of giving haste: Arena of Glory, Bitter Reunion, Hall the Bandit Lord, Lava Spur Boots, Lightning Greaves, Mass Hysteria, Torch Courier. But also, let's not forget the second part of the infamous Cruelclaw, which is you may cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. So regardless of what we hit with it, regardless of what we cheat in, we cheat that card in by discarding, and this means that the infamous Cruelclaw can be used in a sort of reanimator strategy. So if we have any of these big creatures in our hand, like Baleful Force, for example, we can discard them and then we can use reanimation spells to get them back. So the best reanimation spells: Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, Reanimate. You could play more if you wanted to. And then so we're going to have other cards that facilitate that plan. We can't just rely on Cruelclaw, so we also have Faithless Looting and Bitter Reunion. Bunch of card draw spells, Black Market Connections. Insatiable Avarice is technically a card draw spell if we don't use it for the top deck mode. Wheel of Fortune. Now, a lot of people don't like wheels, and they are sort of iffy in terms of when you can use them, but in this case, we need this to combo with Underworld Breach and LED to potentially deck all of our opponents, and then the usual One Ring, etc. We've got a bunch of fast mana. It's possible that we want even more than this so that we can do the whole Peer into the Abyss line with Hoarding Broodlord, but this is at least a little bit to start. Lands, pretty straightforward. The one unique one I'll talk about is Shizo. Again, we are only a black and red deck, which means it doesn't cost us that much to just run this Shizo in place of a swamp. Sometimes our infamous Cruelclaw, despite having Menace, may not be able to attack, so this is just another way of being able to attack. A little bit of protection. Again, we do want Cruelclaw to live, but unlike other commanders, so there's a lot of other decks where it very, very heavily relies around our commander. But in the case of the infamous Cruelclaw, there are ways that we can win outside of Cruelclaw. So there's reanimation. There are other combos that don't rely on Cruelclaw. So it's not as important that we have protection spells. And the protection spells in Rakdos are not that good to begin with anyway. So 3 of these is fine. Then we got a bunch of ramp spells. Nothing much to see here. Some removal. Oppo Agent as stacks. Fire Covenant Deluge. And then we've got the tutors that didn't fall into top deck tutors specifically, so Entomb, Saga, Tainted Pact. But with all that said, that's going to do it. So that is the infamous Cruelclaw in EDH.